Thank you for clicking in this video. In this gripping tale of survival, trust is shattered, fear takes hold, and escaping the shadows may be the only way to stay alive.
The wind howled through the dense canopy of the Appalachian woods as the group of friends huddled together at the trailhead. The sun, once high in the sky, had already dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. Arthur, the unspoken leader of the group, felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked at the old, faded signpost that marked the entrance to the trail. The words "Whispering Pines" were barely legible, worn down by years of neglect and weather. They had heard the stories, rumors passed down through generations about the people who had ventured onto this trail, never to return. But like many others, they dismissed these tales as nothing more than local folklore, exaggerated to keep curious hikers away from the dangers of the forest. After all, they were experienced adventurers, always seeking the thrill of the unknown. Yet, as they took their first steps onto the trail, the air seemed to grow heavier, and an uneasy silence settled around them, as if the very woods were holding its breath. The path was narrow, winding through thick underbrush and towering trees. Every now and then, they would come across a strange marking carved into the bark, a series of cryptic symbols that none of them could decipher. Arthur noticed that the deeper they went, the more frequent these symbols became, almost as if they were guiding them further into the heart of the forest. The others joked about the markings, trying to keep the mood light, but Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As night fell, the group decided to set up camp in a small clearing they had found. The fire crackled, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. They talked and laughed, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that seemed to permeate the air. But as the conversation died down and the night grew colder, they began to hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering that seemed to come from the forest itself. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, but as the whispers grew louder, they realized that it wasn't just random noise. It was as if the forest was speaking to them, calling out to them by name. Arthur's heart raced as he strained to listen, but the words were too jumbled, too distorted to make sense. The others heard it too, and their expressions turned from curiosity to fear. No one spoke, but the tension in the air was palpable. Arthur tried to reason with himself, telling himself that it was just his imagination, that there was a logical explanation for the whispers. But deep down, he knew that something was wrong, terribly wrong. He suggested they pack up and leave, but the others laughed it off, calling him paranoid. They were here for an adventure, after all, and they weren't going to let a few creepy noises scare them away. But as the night wore on, the whispers became more insistent, more distinct. Each member of the group began to hear their own name being called, luring them deeper into the woods. It was a voice that was both familiar and foreign, a voice that resonated with their deepest fears and regrets. Arthur's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan, but the fear was paralyzing, making it hard to think clearly. Then, without warning, one of the group members, Lisa, stood up and began walking towards the darkness, her eyes glazed over as if in a trance. Arthur called out to her, but she didn't respond. The others tried to stop her, but it was as if an unseen force was pulling her away from them. Panic set in as they watched her disappear into the trees, her figure swallowed by the night. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the gravity of their situation. They were no longer in control, something else was guiding them, manipulating them. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and he could feel his own resolve beginning to slip. He knew they had to leave, but the forest seemed to have other plans. The group scrambled to pack up their gear, their movements frantic and disjointed. Arthur kept glancing at the spot where Lisa had vanished, half expecting her to return, but she didn't. The whispers continued to echo in his mind, each one tugging at his sanity. He had never felt fear like this before, this deep, primal terror that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. As they made their way back to the trail, the whispers followed them, growing louder and more persistent. The symbols on the trees seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, guiding them in circles, disorienting them. Arthur's heart sank as he realized they were lost. No matter which direction they took, they always ended up back at the same clearing, the fire still smoldering, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The night seemed endless, each passing minute stretching into an eternity. The forest was alive with unseen eyes, watching their every move, waiting for them to make a mistake. Arthur knew they were being hunted. By what, he couldn't say, but the feeling was unmistakable. The whispers had become a chorus, filling the air with a cacophony of voices, each one more desperate, more pleading than the last. Arthur's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He couldn't understand what was happening, why the forest had turned against them. The others were on the verge of panic, their nerves frayed, their faces pale with terror. They had to get out. They had to find a way to escape this nightmare. But the forest had them in its grip, and it wasn't about to let them go. The minutes turned to hours, and still they wandered, trapped in a maze of darkness and despair. The whispers had become their only guide, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest, away from any hope of salvation. Arthur's thoughts were a jumble of fear and frustration, his mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. The others were barely holding it together, their fear palpable, their voices trembling as they spoke in hushed tones, afraid to draw the attention of whatever was out there. Arthur felt a growing sense of dread, a realization that they might never leave this place. The forest had them now, and it wasn't about to let them go. They were trapped, caught in a web of fear and madness, with no way out. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and Arthur could feel his sanity slipping away, piece by piece. The forest had claimed others before them, and now it was their turn. The group's panic escalated as they realized they were hopelessly lost, trapped in a forest that seemed to defy logic and reason. The moon, once a beacon of light in the darkened sky, was now hidden behind thick clouds, plunging the woods into an oppressive darkness. The only light came from their flickering flashlights, casting weak beams that barely penetrated the thick foliage. Arthur led the way, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to navigate the maze of trees and underbrush. Every step felt like a battle against the forest, as if the very ground beneath their feet was shifting, conspiring to keep them disoriented. The whispers continued, now a constant presence in their minds, twisting their thoughts and feeding their fear. It was as if the forest itself was alive, a malevolent entity that fed on their terror. They pressed on, hoping against hope that they would stumble upon the trail that would lead them back to safety. But every turn they took brought them back to the same clearing, the remnants of their campfire a mocking reminder of their predicament. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming, as if they were caught in an endless loop, doomed to repeat the same futile steps over and over again. As the hours dragged on, the group's exhaustion began to take its toll. Their faces were etched with fear and fatigue, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Arthur could see the despair in their eyes, the creeping realization that they might never escape this place. The whispers had become a relentless assault on their senses, a maddening chorus that echoed in their minds, driving them to the brink of insanity. Desperation set in, and the group began to turn on each other, their fear manifesting as anger and suspicion. Accusations were hurled, blame was cast, and the once tight-knit group began to fracture under the weight of their terror. Arthur tried to keep them together, to maintain some semblance of order, but it was a losing battle. The forest had them in its grip, and it was tearing them apart, one by one. It was then that they heard it, a sound that cut through the whispers, freezing them in their tracks. It was a low, guttural growl emanating from the darkness just beyond the reach of their flashlights. The group fell silent, their eyes wide with terror as they scanned the trees, searching for the source of the noise. The growl came again, closer this time, and Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was out there, it was hunting them. Panic erupted as the group broke into a run, their instincts screaming at them to flee, to escape the unseen predator that stalked them. But the forest seemed to conspire against them, its twisted roots and thick underbrush tripping them up, slowing their progress. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and Arthur knew they were being herded, driven towards some unknown fate by the malevolent force that controlled the forest. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs felt like lead, but no matter how fast or far they ran, they couldn't escape the growl. It followed them, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just out of sight. The whispers had become frenzied, a cacophony of voices that filled their heads, urging them to give in, to surrender to the darkness that surrounded them. Arthur's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan, but every thought was clouded by fear and exhaustion. The forest seemed to warp reality, distorting their senses and playing tricks on their minds. They stumbled through the darkness, their flashlights flickering as the batteries began to die, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent their hearts racing, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. As they stumbled into yet another clearing, Arthur knew they were running out of time. The growl had grown silent, but the oppressive sense of dread remained, weighing heavily on their minds. They were trapped, caught in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The forest had them now, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed them, just as it had claimed Lisa. Arthur tried to rally the group, to keep them focused on finding a way out, but the fear was overwhelming. They were losing hope, their resolve crumbling under the relentless assault of the forest's malevolent influence. The whispers had become a deafening roar, drowning out their thoughts, driving them to the edge of madness. Arthur knew they had to escape, but every path they took seemed to lead them deeper into the heart of the forest, further from any chance of salvation. The group huddled together, their backs to each other, as they tried to fend off the growing darkness. The trees loomed overhead like twisted, skeletal hands, reaching out to ensnare them in their grasp. Arthur could feel the forest closing in around them, tightening its grip, suffocating them with its ancient, malevolent power. They were alone, lost in a world that defied reason, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied. As the night wore on, Arthur felt his strength waning, his mind slipping further into the abyss. The forest had taken everything from them, their sense of direction, their sanity, their hope. And now, it was coming for them, to claim them as it had claimed so many others before. The whispers had become a relentless chant, a twisted lullaby that lulled them into a state of helplessness, a state of surrender. Arthur knew they had to keep moving, had to keep fighting, but the forest seemed to have other plans. Every step they took was met with resistance, every path they chose led them back to the same place. The forest was toying with them, playing a cruel game of cat and mouse, and they were the prey. Arthur could feel the weight of their fate pressing down on him, crushing him under its immense pressure. They were trapped, and there was no way out. As the dawn began to break, the forest remained as dark and menacing as it had been during the night. The faint light filtering through the canopy brought no relief, only casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and twist like specters in the gloom. Arthur and the others were exhausted, their minds frayed from the relentless terror they had endured. They had been walking for what felt like hours, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, an inescapable labyrinth. The air was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the snap of a branch underfoot. The whispers, once a maddening cacophony, had subsided to a low, almost imperceptible murmur, as if the forest was waiting, watching their every move. Arthur could feel the weight of their situation bearing down on him, a crushing sense of dread that made it difficult to think, to breathe. As they trudged forward, Arthur noticed something strange. The trees around them had changed, no longer the twisted, gnarled monstrosities they had encountered before, but tall, ancient oaks with thick trunks and dense foliage. The air seemed cooler here, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly, and for a brief moment, Arthur allowed himself to hope that they had finally found a way out. But that hope was short-lived. They entered a large clearing, the center dominated by a massive, ancient tree, its roots sprawling out like the tentacles of some primordial beast. The bark was dark and cracked, oozing a thick, sap-like substance that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The whispers grew louder as they approached, a frenzied chorus that filled their minds with images of despair and torment. Arthur felt an overwhelming urge to turn back, to flee from this place, but his legs refused to obey. As they stood before the tree, Arthur noticed something even more disturbing. The ground beneath them was littered with bones, human bones, scattered among the roots and half buried in the soil. Some were old and weathered, others fresh, the flesh still clinging to the ivory-white skeletons. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This was a place of death, a sacrificial altar where the forest claimed its victims. Suddenly, the growl returned, reverberating through the clearing with a ferocity that made the ground tremble. The group huddled together, eyes darting around the perimeter, searching for the source of the sound. The growl grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from the tree itself, as if the very earth was alive with malevolent energy. Arthur's heart raced as the ground beneath them began to shift, the roots of the tree twisting and writhing like serpents. Before they could react, the roots shot out from the ground, wrapping around their ankles and dragging them towards the tree. Arthur struggled against the grip, but the roots were like iron chains, tightening with every movement. The whispers had become a deafening roar, filling his mind with screams of agony and despair. The tree loomed over them, its bark splitting open to reveal a gaping maw, a dark, hollow void that seemed to swallow the very light. One by one, the roots pulled them towards the maw, the ground beneath them giving way to a chasm of darkness. Arthur fought with every ounce of strength he had left, but it was futile. The tree was a living, breathing entity, a manifestation of the forest's hunger, and it was devouring them. As he was dragged closer to the maw, Arthur could see the faces of the others, their eyes wide with terror, their screams silenced by the overwhelming force of the tree's pull. As Arthur was pulled into the void, the darkness closed in around him, suffocating him with its icy grip. The whispers became a cacophony of screams, echoing in his mind as he was consumed by the darkness. He felt his consciousness slipping away, his thoughts unraveling as the void swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the tree, its maw closing around him like the jaws of a great beast, sealing his fate. When Arthur opened his eyes, he was no longer in the forest. He found himself standing in a vast, empty space, a desolate wasteland of twisted trees and barren earth. The sky above was a sickly, mottled gray, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. He was alone, the others nowhere to be seen, and the only sound was the distant whisper of the wind, carrying with it the faint echoes of the forest's malevolent laughter. Arthur knew then that he had not escaped. He was trapped in this place, a prisoner of the forest's twisted will, doomed to wander the wasteland for eternity. The forest had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him, and there was no escape. The whispers would haunt him forever, a constant reminder of the nightmare he could never wake from. And as he began to walk, the ground beneath him shifting with each step, Arthur realized that the forest had won.
If you want to watch another story, there is another video appearing on your screen now. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more spine-chilling stories.